So first of all, welcome and thank you for all joining this Travellers webinar today on demystifying cyber insurance. I'm Chris McMurray, for those that don't know me. I'm the MD for cyber here at Travellers. Before we get into the good part and I introduce you to the rest of the panel, to keep our legal guys happy, I do have to show you this disclaimer, but I do promise you it does get a lot more interesting from here on out. So joining me today, I'm pleased to say, are James Doswell, our Senior Risk Management Consultant here at Travellers, Chris Scott, our Director of Claims Management, and Sagar Shah, our Director of Strategic Initiatives. So welcome all. Over the next hour, we are going to look, as I said, at simplifying cyber for you and look into some of those common misconceptions that surround it by looking at two real-life cyber claims that we've handled here at Travellers. Now, most of you will likely have heard of the large company breaches that make the press, including some very high-profile ones in recent months. But what you don't see a lot of are reports of the many breaches that involve SME clients, and unfortunately they are plentiful. So with that in mind, we'll take you through two typical incidents that we see on a regular basis. And as a panel, we'll cover step by step a business email compromise incident and a ransomware incident that we've handled. You'll then have the chance to ask some questions once we've completed each one. And then, as I say, we will then go into highlight the positive impact, which we can add with our latest suite of pre-loss risk services and how they can help try and position a client better to try and prevent themselves being breached and improve our client security posture. And then we'll look to get to the overall value that the Travellers proposition can bring to your clients in the cyberspace with our overall proposition. So let's get started with the business email compromise example. Now, as I mentioned, this was an SME client of ours in the construction industry with less than 10 members of staff. And we often think of when a client has a breach that it's got an impact on their ability to trade, such as their website example. But this particular one, they weren't actually reliant upon their website to trade. They were very much reliant upon word of mouth. And that was where their revenue came from pretty much within the industry. We mentioned, as I said already, that this type of thing doesn't tend to make the press because, as you see, the ones that are very large in size versus this one, which was revenue of £1.5 million. Unfortunately, this isn't uncommon, with almost half of all UK SMEs been hit with a cyber breach in the last 12 months. This is in part due to them being viewed as low-hanging fruit in some ways for threat actors, as they don't have the same resources to protect themselves as maybe some of those larger companies. And often they form part of a supply chain into those larger entities, which for a threat actor is often a good way in to try to breach them. There's also the sad fact that some of those SMEs who are breached don't actually survive and ultimately go out of business. And this may be due to not just the initial financial impact, but other factors rather, such as reputational damage. As part of the underwriting process, we look at the security controls a client has in place. Coming to you first, James, we know clients need to be proactive in protecting themselves. In this particular example, what measures did they have in place, and are they typical for a company of their size?
Thanks, Chris. Yes, so certainly, I mean, in terms of precautions taken, the insured use email for quotes, invoices, order confirmations, general sort of communications with customers and suppliers. And to manage this safely, they rely on a managed service provider to filter out spam. And they're aware of phishing. They felt confident in spotting attacks. With no online sales and minimal digital presence beyond perhaps Trustpilot and similar, they consider themselves relatively overall a low risk in where cyber's concerned. And they'd thought about and discussed phishing, but felt relatively safe and that they'd spot an attack when it happened. Sagar, before I talk about the breach, are you able to provide some examples of where our services really complement this type of company and environment?
Yeah, of course. So as the stat shows, it's very common and understandable for many small businesses to rely on managed service providers. I want to call out 2 services that we have seen our insureds that use MSPs leverage and the positive feedback that we've gotten about them. The first is eRisk Hub, which is an online cyber resource portal offered to all of our insureds. It's a centralized location where clients can learn, prepare, and respond with access to things like training modules, self-service risk assessments, best practice templates, and instant response playbooks. And secondly, as our insureds are working with their MSPs, looking into eRisk Hub, questions might come up. And when they do, or if they even want to run something past our experts, our team is always available for security consultations throughout their policy period at no additional cost. But with that, let me pass it back to you, James, to see what happens next in our scenario.
Certainly. So the breach. In this case, an employee in the finance team was directly targeted in a spear phishing attack and received a genuine looking invoice as an email attachment. It had the requirement to log in to view it for security. The login actually took the member of staff to a fake but very realistic looking login page that was actually hosted by the attacker. The user entered their details, and due to a lack of MFA, multi-factor authentication, on the user's email account, they literally gave the attacker the full details to log into their cloud-based mailbox in what is potentially a very typical type of phishing attack. The user was then provided with a relatively basic invoice appearing to be from a well-known supplier, and they realized it was a fake, closed it down, deleted it. But it didn't occur to them that this would actually have compromised their login details. They didn't think about that part. What happened after this is that the attacker gained access to and quietly monitored that email and the communications in that mailbox for several weeks. And the person whose mailbox it was didn't really think anything more of it. Basically, the attacker included a hidden copy and forward rule in the mailbox settings, and then waited for a supplier invoice or client payment instruction to come through. A reasonably large value payment instruction came through, and the attacker inserted themselves into the genuine email chain, which ended in a change of bank details on a £20,000 supplier payment. Ultimately, this resulted in the payment being sent to the attacker's account instead of the supplier's.
Thanks for that, James. So this, unfortunately, as we've said, is a very common occurrence. So we've covered here what's happened to this point. Chris Scott, coming to you now from a claims hat on, could you give us a little bit more on how that actually impacted upon the business?
Yeah, sure, Chris. So yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, we see this type of scenario very, very frequently. I mean, certainly about half the cases that we deal with on the claims side in relation to either social engineering, fraud, or business email compromise. So threat actors, who are the criminals behind the attacks, will be looking for that low-hanging fruit, as you were mentioning earlier. And it wouldn't be uncommon to see them sitting in the compromised accounts for a period of time, like James was mentioning, setting up those malicious rules. So in terms of this particular case, in terms of the policy response, there was a number of clauses engaged there to really assist the insured in dealing with the incident itself. So the policy provided cover for legal experts. They were able to assist the insured with their legal and regulatory requirements arising out of the breach itself. So that involved notification to the regulators. The law firm also assisted with the communications for the insured, which really helped minimise the impact on the insured's reputation. Policy also engaged the use of IT forensics vendors who really helped with that containment, investigation and recovery phases. So that gave the reassurance to the insured that there was no further existing threat from the threat actor, and it also helped inform those notifications required to the regulators. And then the final element of cover was for the funds loss itself. So the policy provided cover for the fraudulent transfer. So obviously we've talked a little bit there about how the policy itself responds in terms of the notification path that the insured took. So they telephoned the breach response hotline. So that's open on a 24/7 basis. Within 30 minutes of that notification call, they were put on what's called a breach response call with the experts. So that involves the breach coach, who's the law firm that we work with, one of the IT forensics panel, as well as the assigned claim professional from Travellers. From there, we all assisted in formulating the resolution strategy for the insured to tackle this incident itself. So in terms of the forensic investigation, that, like I say, helps contain the incident itself. It also confirmed that there hadn't been any exfiltration of any data from the compromised accounts. And like I say, it also informed the scope of that notification to the regulators. There were very regular touch points with the insured all the way through the incident itself, really just providing them with updates on the progress of the investigation and where we were getting to. So they were typically chaired by the breach coach. I suppose final point from me is really just to reinforce on that initial breach response call. So that is complementary under the policy. We would always encourage insureds to utilise it as quickly as possible. That way we can really just formulate that resolution strategy to deal with the incident as quickly as possible. So with that, I'll pass back to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's a good overview of how the claims process works there. So thankfully, once we're through that recovery stage, what happens in the aftermath? So in this particular case, there was a full system review now carried out with the breach response team, and they implemented security upgrades, including adding multi-factor authentication, checking of email logs as part of that process going forward. The client is now at the stage where they're back up and running as normal, but they still have the process of trying to rebuild customer confidence in their reputation. There's also the often forgotten part of any breach, which is the human element, as the focus tends to be on the likes of the IT and the business disruption. But it's a very stressful time for those within the business on the front line dealing with any attack. Those responsible for IT, for example, they may feel personally responsible, even if that's not actually reasonable. And that's why we provide a unique cyber wellness service to our insureds that provides confidential counselling for insureds following a breach. Saga, just on the theme of services, in addition to that wellbeing support, what other services do we provide that can add value here?
And perfect. And yeah, I can't highlight the cyber wellbeing initiative that you mentioned, Chris. Regardless of the size of the organization, when a cyber attack occurs, the amount of time and energy spent getting out of it exhausts employees, and that's even more for smaller organizations. But going back to the scenario, one of the recommendations was implementing MFA, and we've heard from our insureds that there's complexities and questions that come up when they go through the implementation process, and that's even more for smaller organizations with smaller security teams. And that's why our team offers MFA implementation support to assist our insureds in providing direct guidance as questions come up throughout the process. And additionally, after things have calmed down from the incident, our team offers a free post-incident consultation. Really, the focus is to review what happened, controls that were in place, provide guidance, and really use the incident as a teachable moment so it helps the insured not just become whole, but stronger for the future. And with that, let me give back to you, Chris.
Yeah, excellent, Saga, and thanks for that overview. Okay, so having gone through the breach from cradle to grave, we can see that the attack was thankfully contained quite quickly, but there are lasting consequences for their reputation and issues with their supply chain. Under our policy, we do provide full limit coverage for reputational harm, and we also provide some limited coverage for a dependent business interruption for both IT and non-IT that will cover those disruptions to our insured if a supplier of theirs cannot supply to them due to them suffering a cyber breach. We also, in a recent cyber risk wording update, widened our crime coverage for incidents like this to an any one claim basis from an aggregate. This provides that extra layer of protection should our insured suffer a repeat attack similar to this in the same policy period. Saga, just before we move on to some Q&A in this one, I just wanted to bring you back in here for a last point on the risk services and if there is anything else that we can offer to help our insureds here.
Yeah, and I would add that from our experience, when we see what our insureds go through when a claim does occur, we also look at it as a learning moment for our team, and that feeds into the services that we offer. So two I would call out. First is our continuous dark web monitoring. That gives firms comfort that if there were threat actors selling stolen credentials, for example, on the dark web, our team would notify them immediately to get ahead of any potential future incidents. We've heard positive feedback regarding this from brokers and insureds because they think of it as an extension of their security team. And in today's landscape, where it takes a lot of time, money, and energy to keep eyes everywhere. Secondly, our team can provide templates and guides for incident response plans and business continuity plans, which are key to reference whenever an incident does occur. And as I mentioned before, the eRisk Hub, that also has a huge selection of other policy templates that can help smaller organizations continue to build and enhance their security program. Now we're going to touch on this a little bit later, but just want to give a little teaser. And that's to make it all easy for all of you and your clients, a concise 2-pager that gives an overview of all of our cyber risk services is going to be included in both quotes and issued policy documents. And your underwriter can also share it with you if needed outside of that. This really helps ensure that everyone understands the added value Travelers provides, and there's no extra paperwork or separate enrollment needed. And this way, it can also help you to start having conversations with your insureds early and demonstrate that their policy is more than just coverage, but active risk reduction. But with that in mind, maybe we should open it up for any questions.
Yeah, we're at the halfway point of examples, so this seems like a good time to take a look at some of the questions that you've asked. We do have a question. I'll pick this one up, actually. So we have a question here in relation to verification required. So the question is, do you insist the client verifies a transfer before it's sent, as appears in some policy wordings, for coverage to be in place? Good question and quite topical for us. So we, in our latest cyber risk update, we removed any reference to any transfer verification language. So there is no requirement for verification to have taken place before funds are transferred for coverage to take place. So again, the clients get that extra peace of mind that they've got that coverage, even if something has slipped through the net on that piece. What else we have? We have another question, this time probably directed towards you, Sagar, on services. Do you have examples of where your services have helped a client be more proactive in protecting themselves from threats that exist out there, rather than just after the event following a breach?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think one thing we found that our insureds really appreciate is our services onboarding call. So once a policy binds, the insured can reach out to our team to schedule an onboarding call. And this onboarding call introduces the insured to our cyber risk services team. And during that call, we'll walk them through the services, answer any questions. And what we found is often the insured uncovers areas where we can provide immediate help. And this gets them ahead and use some of the proactive services that we offer.
Excellent. Okay, so moving on to our second example, and one that probably captures more headlines than any other, which is ransomware. So you've all likely heard of, as we mentioned earlier, some of those large retail manufacturing examples over the past few months. But what does that look like for a small business? So in this case, we had a small bathroom manufacturer, again, small number of employees, revenue a bit higher than the last one at 25 million, but not huge. And like many manufacturers, they're heavily reliant on the systems for the production and inventory. Now, ransomware, certainly from an underwriting standpoint, not just a client standpoint, is probably the one that keeps us awake at night, and with good reason. If you look at our Traveller Cyber Threat Report, this really illustrates why, because in Q1 this year, there was over 2,200 incidents which appeared on ransomware leak sites. And this was actually the highest quarterly total in the 4 years that we've kept that record. So I think it shows that the threat is very much alive and unfortunately continues to evolve. James, coming back to you on this one. We're looking here at a small manufacturer. Again, we have an MSP involved, but in your mind, what did their overall precautions look like?
Thanks. Yeah, so yeah, you're right. The insured used a managed service provider for their IT support, and it was a complete suite, and they felt confident that security was taken care of. Network equipment is worth mentioning here that network equipment requires updates and patches just as workstations and servers do. But with the MSP, it had to be requested in order for the MSP to actually schedule it in as work and basically organise resource for it. So the insured had given cyber attacks very little thought, and they believed that all of the IT security they required was automatically done for them. And culturally, the firm viewed cyber as very light touch with little employee training. Their line of thought was very much, why would a hacker come after me? And besides, we've got a proper technology firm to actually run it for us. So coming to the breach, hackers routinely scan internet addresses, and as vulnerabilities come out, they'll use it just in an opportunistic fashion. They'll exploit critical unpatched vulnerabilities. In this case, the insured's firewall had a vulnerability on their SSL VPN. So the attackers exploited that vulnerability, much like a burglar might use a side window that's been accidentally left open, or if it's got a broken latch. And the breach came in via a gap caused by that misunderstanding, where the IT provider hadn't yet addressed the patch, and they'd simply not been asked to. So once inside, the attackers ran software, took over admin controls, and were quickly able to gain full control. They ran automated scripts to disable the antivirus software and harvested staff's credentials. They then remotely connected to the servers. They copied multiple documents out of the company, and in this case, they actually encrypted shared files, design documents, and the production scheduling system. The first that the insured were aware of it was that a ransom note appeared. Your systems are locked. Pay £500,000 in Bitcoin, or your data will be leaked. Perhaps somewhat ironic for a bathroom manufacturer, but certainly not a laughing matter for the insured.
Yeah. Thanks for that overview, James. I mean, I think the point that I would make here as well is, we've touched upon that ransomware cases are certainly rising. And that ransomware demand that you mentioned, the 500,000, I mean, typically attacks can reach 10% of annual revenue. And from a client's perspective, if they didn't have that cyber insurance policy in place, park the ransom for a second, they would have obviously to bear that full financial risk themselves, but then they've got the task of running around and trying to pull together their own breach response in terms of vendors, etc. So it really does show that a cyber policy is more than just essentially paying your claim at the end of the day. So we've run through the profile, we went through what happened, we went through the actual breach and how typical that actually is. Chris, Scott, again, coming back to you. How did this actually impact on the client from a claims perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So yeah, I mean, the impact of ransomware attacks, really far-reaching. We're just to kind of, I suppose, say we're seeing the volume of attacks really kind of on the up. So they've doubled from prior years. So in this particular scenario, the insured was locked down to their systems, and it became evident pretty quickly that there was going to be an issue. So we saw that the MSP was completely overwhelmed, and the insured was receiving lots of calls. So we worked with them to alleviate that pressure. So the breach coach themselves were instructed and provided some communication that the management director could use to kind of field off some of those calls. So from a policy response perspective, again, another number of areas of the policy that are going to be engaged here to assist the insured with this particular incident. So we had the instruction of legal experts, like I mentioned. They obviously dealt with the communications for the insured, but also assisted with those legal and regulatory requirements as well arising out of the incident, as well as acting as project manager for the breach response. We also instructed IT forensics. They were primarily there to help with the containment and the investigation, as well as the recovery of the incident itself. So they certainly worked very closely with the MSP there, really to make that recovery as efficient as possible, really. But certainly, as the investigation started, it became very evident that the backups available weren't really viable. So it was actually necessary to engage with a threat actor negotiator. So again, the policy responded there and picked up the costs of that. So the threat actor negotiator it is, as it sounds, it's a specialist firm who are there to pick up the communications with the threat actor and ultimately negotiate a settlement. In terms of the ransom demand itself, so obviously that was subject to very rigorous sanction checks, both from our end and from all of the vendors instructed. But again, the policy responded to cover the ransom payment itself, and then obviously later on down the line, dusted settled. The policy also responded to provide business interruption cover for the insured, as well as engaging with a forensic accountant to assist in the calculation of those losses. So I mean, here the insured did experience a downtime of around 7 weeks. So we would really worked with them all the way throughout, arranging interim payments just to really kind of keep the cash flow going, whilst we kind of worked with the forensic accountants to calculate those overall losses. In terms of the notification route, again, very, very similar to the business email compromise incident that we talked about a little bit earlier on. So the insured contacted travellers through the breach response hotline. So again, that's open on a 24/7 basis. They were on a breach response call with the experts within 30 minutes of notification. As I mentioned a little bit earlier there, it became evident pretty clear from an early stage that the viableness of the backups were not kind of able to be used. So the threat actor negotiator picked up communications with the threat actor, obviously bringing in a bit of intelligence from prior instance that they'd worked with that particular threat actor group before, and we were able to negotiate a settlement from the initial demand of 500,000 down to 200,000. Obviously the IT forensics team were also looped in there, really just to kind of test the decryption key, just to ensure that did ultimately work before the demand itself was paid. And then we were able to, like I say, engage with the forensic accountants to get that business interruption loss kind of covered off and put the insured back into a wholesome position. In terms of I suppose how the incident itself played out, so there were very, very regular touch points. So there were daily calls on this incident, just really to update the insured, make sure that they were able to understand exactly where the investigation was going and where they were looking at from a business continuity perspective. That way they were able to kind of really manage that message with the internal and external stakeholders, to make sure that the impact on their reputation was really as minimal as possible. With that, I think I was going to pass back to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. Again, good detailed overview. So then looking at the aftermath, so the investigation revealed a mix of patching delays and weak credential management had helped lead to that breach. New controls were introduced, including that continuous monitoring, VPN checks, and enforced password rotation. Sagar, again, coming back to you from the services perspective, what else can we add here as a layer to help our clients?
Yeah, no, this is perfect. And I think one thing to mention is that it's common with not just smaller organizations, but a lot of organizations around keeping up with patching, because there's always vulnerabilities out there, and it takes time to determine whether there's an impact and how bad it is to your organization. And so with that in mind, our team provides external perimeter and alerting. What this is travelers' ongoing scanning, which continuously monitors the external perimeter environment, similar to how threat actors might do to identify potential threats, similar to what James mentioned. And when a new cyber threat or vulnerability is identified, such as an open port or an outdated software being exploited, our team analyzes it and determines which insureds are potentially exposed. Those insureds and their brokers receive an alert within hours, often days before public exploitation occurs. These alerts include the specific steps for remediation, and it really helps our insureds act fast and hopefully prevent potential incidents. And our data shows and supports this, that the insureds get an average 15 days advance notice before the alerted threats are exploited in the wild, and they're able to patch their systems 3 times faster, which is a huge benefit that many of their insureds give us feedback on. Secondly, as you can see in the scenario, with the recommendations that come after a breach, not everything can be managed in-house, just based on the team capacity, budget, priorities, or even knowledge. And many organizations will look at external vendors to help support them. What our insureds we've seen do is they can shoot us an email or schedule time with our team if they want recommendations based on what we see other organizations in similar size or scale using. They can also talk to our experts on best practices, answer questions around the recommended security controls, or anything else that they just want to, bounce off an expert. We really like to highlight that we're here to help support our insureds throughout their security journey. With that, I'll give that to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for that, Saga. So, in summary, this is a claim that is a typical ransomware scenario, and it highlights the importance of cybersecurity not being a one and done approach. It's an ongoing process that takes work, it takes time, it takes investment. And you can also see here that there's many different functions when a breach occurs from a breach response perspective, and the various vendors that are needed to resolve that incident. Without a cyber insurance policy providing that key support, an SME would have to run around and try and pull that together on their own at a time when they're likely probably in full-blown panic mode, don't know where to turn, and ultimately they need to focus on keeping the business as functional as they possibly can at that point. The other point I would make is there's also often a lot of focus on the ransom payment itself. But as you can see here, the amount that is actually made up on the breach response costs as opposed to the actual ransom itself, if we even have to pay a ransom. That's why we now offer, as an optional extension, breach response costs outside of the limit. This adds an extra layer of protection for our clients to insulate those breach response costs whilst keeping the main policy limit intact. Saga, coming back to you, and I know you've already touched upon some of these risk services in both examples already, but is there anything else that you want to mention here that would be of assistance?
Yeah, and I think we've mentioned a lot of our services, but I think one thing to highlight is a common theme across both these stories is that threat actors don't discriminate by size. What really makes a difference is preparedness. And so the risk services aren't about preventing every attack, but they are about giving you and your clients a head start when one happens. And they are free, they're simple to request, and hopefully will show your clients that you are continuing to be ahead of the curve and supporting them on their security journey. But with that, I think we should open up for any questions that anyone has.
Yeah, let's look at what we have here. And if we don't get to all these, we will respond to those other ones offline as best we can. So here's one here. One of your examples today, you've covered a construction risk and the other one a manufacturer. What other industries are you seeing a frequency of activity on? I'll go to Chris Scott on that one from the claims side.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, I suppose it's right to say that threat actors don't discriminate when it comes to ransoms, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, we see ransom cases playing out in all types of areas, to be perfectly honest. So we see quite a lot in retail as well as kind of professional services and the legal sector. I suspect that's probably tied to the kind of the financial transactions and the funds that they have. So they know that there will be something to potentially pay and they can cause disruption. And equally, it will become evident pretty quickly that there is a problem because their whole, I suppose, ball game is to entice the companies into those negotiations. So yeah, we see them across all sectors, I think, is the honest answer, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. And then sticking with you, Chris, actually, we've got a question here on the ransom payment itself. And probably one that comes up quite a lot, but how often would you say the ransom is typically paid versus us being able to resolve without having to pay that request?
Good question. I mean, I think Generally speaking, we don't pay ransoms very often. So that there's obviously there is cover under the policy to pay it should it be required, and that there are sanction checks undertaken, and provided they are clear, that there would be no issues with payment. But I mean, I think the reality we see with the vast majority of our ransom cases, we're engaging the experts very early on. And the insureds have a good business continuity plan, so we're able to work with them very, very quickly and get them back into a position of operating. So much so that we don't need to actually make a payment. But we may well engage with the threat actor groups to perhaps either buy a bit of time whilst regulatory notifications are being undertaken, or essentially just see what kind of data they may have taken if they have gone down the exfiltration route. But yeah, in the vast majority of cases, we're not actually needing to make a payment itself.
I think that the only thing I would add there as well, it's all about that preparedness, isn't it? So obviously Sagar's touched upon the services, and I think the clients that have been proactive and prepared and engaging in some of the services that we offer are some of those ones, as you say, that we can then actually resolve without having to pay the ransom.
Absolutely.
On the subject of services, Sagar, I'm going to pass to you now. We're through those examples to give us a little bit more detail of some of those that you've mentioned just as we went through.
No, perfect. And so, as I mentioned, one of the most impactful parts of the cyber risk services is our threat monitoring and alerting program. And so I thought it'd be beneficial to run through an example of our threat alerting in action. So recently, our cyber risk services team received an urgent notification that a threat actor had compromised one of our insured virtual private networks and was selling access to other criminals on the dark web. So the team raced against the clock to notify the insured and take steps to avoid a full-blown incident. And so what that means is within minutes, we sent them an alert, and our in-house expert was on the phone trying to reach the insured as well as the broker. We eventually got the insured on a call, and with our in-house expert, they made sure that immediately they revoked access for the compromised VPN account, and they took the VPN offline to really investigate and find if there was any evidence that a threat actor had been trying to get in. And when they did find that a threat actor had been trying different password combinations before successfully connecting to the VPN via an account that had a weak password. So what next steps was is that the traveler's expert worked with them to get MFA set up on their VPN accounts and ensure that there was no evidence of further access by the threat actor in their network. And so what to highlight here is that in these scenarios, things move fast. And so once a threat actor sells access, it's often a ransom group will be knocking at the door within a day or two. So the quick action by our Traveler Cyber Risk Services team really resulted in what we like to call a major win, and that is that the insured avoiding a far more impactful claim and likely avoiding a £250,000 ransomware claim. Now, if you go to the next slide, Chris. I hinted at this earlier, but I thought it'd be good to show it. This is the two-pager that will hopefully make it easy for you and your clients to really understand the cyber risk services. And this two-pager, will automatically be included in both quotes and issued policy documents. And really the goal is to make sure everyone understands the added value Travelers provides without doing extra paperwork or separate enrollment. And it's a little small at the bottom, but you'll see it when you receive it. But you can reach out to our team by sending an email to cyberservices@travelers.com, or you can reach out to your underwriter and they can talk to you about the services or connect you to our team. And if you go to the next slide, I did want to highlight what truly differentiates Travelers isn't just that we offer services, it's how we deliver them. And there are four main things that I believe make us stand out. First, it's targeted. Last year, there were 40,000 known vulnerabilities, and we cut through that noise and alerted only when something truly mattered and it truly impacted our policyholder. And the intent behind this is really to avoid email fatigue or alert fatigue. Second, it's faster. Our proprietary threat intelligence pipeline allows us to alert insureds the same day a vulnerability is identified. versus our competitors who often take up to 2 weeks because they sometimes rely on a third party. And third, and I can't emphasize this enough, it's free. Unlike some of our competitors who charge additional fees, all of our cyber risk services are included at no extra cost. And really, our goal is that every insured benefits from these capabilities. And finally, it's proven. I mentioned this stat before, but insureds who act on our alerts patch up to 3 times faster with an average 15 days advance notice before these threats are exploited in the wild. So really, if I had to summarize, in short, Traveler Cyber Risk Services combines precision, speed, accessibility, and proven results to give you and your clients the confidence that Travelers is more than just an insurer. We're a partner in resilience. But with that, let me pass it back to you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you for that really good overview there, Saga. So to finish up today, you've heard a lot from us on the exposures and how those are played out in real life, and how our product and risk services can add value to your clients. So to bring all that together, why should you place your client cyber with Travelers? Well, first of all, we're an established global market for cyber. Travelers began writing cyber in its initial form, so it's very different now, of course, in the late 90s in the US. We can provide 5 million limit capacity to your SME clients, rising to 10 million for those slightly larger at 250 mil revenue and above to make sure your clients have adequate protection. You also have our online My Travellers portal that you can access and quote and bind risks up to 100 mil revenue and 3 mil limit. In the coming month or so as well, we will be adding in the Traveller Scan capability to that platform, which is our outside to in scan, which gives a score to your clients, alerts them on vulnerabilities. So again, adding that extra level of protection, and then leading into some of the services which Saga had mentioned as part of that. We have spoken a lot about SMEs today. That's been the main focus, but we do write business internationally for SME, mid-market and large corporate clients, both on a primary and excess basis. And as the panel have covered those risk services and that key post-breach response we offer to all our cyber insureds. The other thing to mention is we do write these risks across a wide range of industries. There are in fact very few trades that we don't write based solely on what they do. At Travelers, we like to underwrite the risk, and if we can get comfortable with their controls and their exposure, then we will look to write that business. Final takeaway from me is clients shouldn't think of investment in cybersecurity versus purchasing cyber insurance as a choice and a decision that they have to make. They both should go very much hand in hand to provide that maximum protection for those businesses who, sadly, if they haven't been breached already, they likely won't have very long to wait until they are. So with that, I would like to thank the panel for their contributions, and most of all to all of you who have joined us today, which I appreciate. It's a very busy time of year. It's very much appreciated. You will get a copy of the slides along with a link to the recording of the session and the 2-page risk services overview that Saga touched upon in the session. I would encourage you to reach out to your local Travelers underwriter to find out more and certainly to try us out. So once again, thank you all very much, and I hope you have a very enjoyable rest of the day and rest of the week. Thank you very much.